Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo! It's time to drive Steens Mountain. Good old Oregon. It's known for the Willamette Valley and the coast. But out here on the eastern side of Oregon, there's a big hole that I always thought was just filled with desert. Lordy, was I ever wrong about that. There's some great country just waiting for a little 1 or 2 or 3 day drive right in our back door. A good excuse to go adventuring in this country is driving to the top of Steens Mountain. These Steens Mountains are the ones that you see off to the west as you drive from Winnemucca to Jordan Valley. Getting to the top of Steens Mountain itself can be rather difficult because of snow. For that reason, I decided to go in July of the year 2008. On past episodes of Drive Steens, we've enjoyed Gentura, we spent a night in Diamond, and then we went driving up to Steens Mountain and down a very rough road on the way back. From there, we had lunch at Fields, and then we went on and almost ran out of gas before the gods of gasoline saved us at Adele. What a foolish thing to do, something I had told myself I would never do again once I was past my 20s, but being a guy, it seems that I have to make a fool of myself every once in a while. Thank goodness I didn't have to walk. From Adele, we went down and explored the lovely little town of Alturas, and then headed back to Cedarville. From Cedarville, we set out on a 60-mile jaunt across a little dirt road that cuts across the very northwest corner of Nevada. We got back to Highway 140 and the wonderful paved highway. We then headed toward Deneo Junction, and we got distracted at Dufarina Field Station, which is a part of the Sheldon National Wildlife Refuge. After passing through Deneo Junction, we headed up to Fields. We spent the night at Fields, and the next morning we discovered we had a semi-flat tire. Well, we got it filled up with air, didn't particularly feel like hanging around, and figured, we can stop and keep filling it up on the way home. So, we headed on out, drove past Alvord Desert, and then up the east side of the Steens Mountains. For 2 episodes of Drive Steens, we spent our time leisurely driving up the east side of the Steens Mountains. In our last episode, we got to the northern end of our journey and found beautiful Man Lake. Man Lake gets to be an entire 14 feet deep. A few miles past Man Lake, we came over a little knoll, looked into another little valley, and there, on the far side of this valley, we saw Highway 78 that connects Burns and Burns Junction. We turned right on Highway 78 and headed off toward Burns Junction and, hopefully, to find a gas station with an air compressor because the rear tire was down a bit. Not enough to worry about, but even 2 or 3 pounds is enough to get me wanting to correct the situation. were some nice little jogs and jigs as we went through the low rolling hills. And as we came into the valley that holds Burns Junction, I wasn't too surprised to find the long, straight roads we're all so familiar with when we head to Eastern Oregon. Miles after getting on Highway 78, we see the trees of Burns Junction off in the distance. I've eaten chicken fried steak to define all of chicken fried steakdom in Burns Junction. This time, I found the gas tanks telling us that the full price was twice what it says on the pump. Obviously, the pumps are way too old to keep up with modern prices. And I also found they were temporarily out of gas anyway. I also found there was no air compressor. I had to record how the layer of dust had just been getting thicker and thicker on the car ever since leaving Gentura and starting out on my first dirt road so many days before. For this journey, the dirt roads were behind us. I kind of had my heart set on another one of those chicken fried steaks at Burns Junction, but I had a leaking tire and no compressor. So I headed out, striking toward Rome, hoping that there I could top off the air pressure. As we approach the Owyhee River Valley, we see the road that cuts down into the valley on the far side, and there, down below, we see the trees that once again mean civilization. In this case, Rome Junction. Rome is some 15 miles from Burns Junction, heading back toward Boise. I didn't worry too much about this sign as I approached Rome. For those of you who have never been to Rome, or who have never stopped, it is one fine wide spot in the road. This is mostly it. They do provide for the pooches. There are some cabins. Along the outside of the building, there are the excellent restroom facilities. These get quite chilly on winter days. I knew that from past experience. And you can see how generous they are with room. I enjoyed an excellent mushroom hamburger. I appreciated the honesty of the signage. It ain't healthy, but it sure tastes good. Seems like an excellent motto for Pop's Place. I also noticed that apparently a lot of people wonder if a debit card counts for a credit card. They had to tack that on that, oh yes, it does. Whether it's a credit card or a debit card, banks charge more to process smaller purchases than large ones. Having people purchase $1 and $2 items on debit and credit cards can run small businesses out of business. And, of course, they have to raise their prices just because we're too stupid to carry $5 or $10 or $20 in cash. Fortunately, I had no complaints about credit cards or debit cards or my food or the tiny bathrooms. It turns out that the arrow is pointing back the way I had come. From Rome, I headed across the desert to beautiful Jordan Valley. As we approach Jordan Valley, we can look across the state line and see where the Delamar mine is taking the top off of the Owyhee Mountains. This is a little bit south of Silver City. We can't see it from Boise, but we can certainly see it from this angle. Finally, I found a gas station that looked rather modern, and indeed, on the side of the building was an air hose. At the far end of Jordan Valley, you turn left following Highway 95. On our next episode of Drive Steens, we'll find our way back to Boise. Here we have Vatican City in Rome. The Vatican is actually a country. It is housed in many, many buildings, many of them famous, many of them not so famous. Part of the Vatican is the Pope's private chambers, his apartment where he lives. In the entrance to the Pope's chambers, there are 4 halls and rooms that you go through before you get to the chambers themselves. These halls and chambers are called the Raphael rooms. The majority of the work decorating these rooms was done by Raphael, a rather famous painter who, along with Michelangelo, defined the high Renaissance in art. As you approach the Pope's apartment from the east, heading toward the west, the first of these chambers that you come into is the Hall of Constantine. More about the Hall of Constantine in a bit. Continuing our trip toward the west, the next room we enter is the Room of Heliodorus. There are 4 major paintings by Raphael in this room. The room is named after this one, the expulsion of Heliodorus from the temple. The paintings in this room depict God's protection of the church. This particular painting tells the story from 2nd Maccabees of Heliodorus being sent by the king of Syria to raid the treasury of the temple of Jerusalem. God responded to the prayers of the high priest Onias and sent a horseman and 2 youths to drive Heliodorus from the temple. The next room we enter is the Room of the Signatura. Raphael's Dispensation of the Holy Sacrament, painted in 1509, is one of the defining works of this room. The 4th and final room as we approach the Pope's chamber is the Room of the Fire in the Borgo. In the year 847, there was a fire in the Borgo district of Rome that threatened the entire city. Catholic tradition says Pope Leo IV contained this fire with his benediction. The largest of all these rooms is the first, the Hall of Constantine. Constantine was the emperor who made Rome a Christian empire. The walls of the Hall of Constantine are covered by Raphael paintings that honor Constantine's achievements. Constantine was one of several emperors of the Roman Empire. He was serving in the West. At some point, he decided to return to Rome and replace Maxentius, who was the emperor serving in Rome. Constantine was married to a Christian woman to whom he was very devoted. Legend has it that on the eve of the battle with Maxentius, Christ had appeared to Constantine in a dream and had told him to place Christ's sign on the shields of his soldiers. In another version of this legend, Constantine had seen the cross in the sky, accompanied by the legend, quote, "By this sign you will be victor," end quote. The next morning, Constantine and Maxentius met in battle at Milvian Bridge. Constantine was victorious. Milvian Bridge crossed the Tiber River just a few miles north of Rome. With his victory in the year 312, Constantine became the emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Constantine was married to a Christian lady. However, he himself remained a sun worshipper until just before his death, when he gave way to being baptized. The Hall of Constantine was one of the last to be decorated. By the time the work was actually being done, Raphael could no longer work on the paintings. They were completed to his design by his students. The ceilings of the Hall of Constantine were painted by another person, Tommaso Loretti. This piece, The Triumph of Christianity, is what led me to research all this stuff in the first place. When we look at a detail, we see that it is Christ on the cross, standing triumphant over the gods of Hellenism, shattered on the floor. Unfortunately, this is the highest resolution available, but let's look at some details. Christ on the cross and the shattered deity of antiquity. Of course, this could be any image from the Hellenistic era, but from the wings on the helmet and the sepulchre on the ground behind him, this is obviously Mercury. Mercury represented the concepts of abundance and success, and he stood for trade, particularly in grain, and commerce. He was often represented with a goat, who was the herald of the new day, and he also carried dreams to the living, as well as led the newly deceased into the afterlife. I don't know, folks. A God that celebrates the very creation that we are, or a God that's hung up on a torture device and symbolizes our becoming hung up on guilt and shame. Knowing the Spirit of Christ as I do, I'm not sure but what this is a picture of Christ weeping at the fall of humanity. I certainly don't think this is a triumph of Christianity that I would celebrate. However, there's no reason to worry. After all, it was a triumph that never existed. An excellent example of that truism is Tommaso Loretti himself. Yes, he did come up with this image of the shattered gods of antiquity that was designed for a place that would be mostly seen by the Pope. However, most of his works were more like this. This is the base of Neptune's fountain, which Tommaso designed for all the public to see in Bologna, Italy. Here we see art's eternal devotion to our long and lustrous history. Even Raphael, if we look at his Fire in the Borgio, referenced the stories and the living history of antiquity. In the corner, fleeing from the fire, Raphael has painted a youth carrying an old man. Here, Raphael is echoing a classical story from that darned antiquity. It is the story of Aeneas carrying his father. His father is Anchises, and they are fleeing from the fires of Troy. In this reference to antiquity, Raphael is alluding to the traditional idea that Rome was the new Troy. Throughout history, and even today, the stories of antiquity influence our art, our heritage, and our thinking. For humanity to throw out all of its history just because some upstart new religion claims triumphant is unthinkable. Frankie was doing real well for himself. He got the extra big car and the extra big house and the trophy wife. Then 2008 came along and Frankie wasn't doing so well. Poor Frankie. He really didn't know which end was up or which way to turn. He didn't worry too much about it until one day his secretary got hold of him on the intercom. She said, "Frankie, your broker is on the line." Frankie became aware of just how dire his situation was when, without even thinking, he asked his secretary, "Is that my stockbroker or pawn?" And that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next week. In the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo!